She walks into a quiet coffee shop just after noon, orders a drink, sits down. Someone outside is watching the door. Minutes later, a car pulls away from the curb. She doesn't walk out with it, and no one inside seems to notice she's gone. She had been up since early that morning, not because she needed to be, but because she couldn't sleep past it anymore. Weekdays had a rhythm now. Alarm at 7, coffee at home, shower, then a slow decision about what the day would look like. She worked part-time, mostly remote, and the hours were flexible. Some mornings she stayed in pajamas until noon. Other mornings, like this one, she put on real clothes and left the apartment with a sense of purpose. The coffee shop was only a few blocks away, a place she'd been to dozens of times. Quiet, clean, the kind of spot people chose when they didn't want to be noticed. She liked that about it. No loud music, no long lines, just a few small tables, a counter, and windows that let in soft daylight without putting anyone on display. She checked her phone as she walked. A message waited there, sent a few minutes earlier. Short, casual. He said he was already nearby. Said traffic was lighter than he expected. She read it twice, then slipped the phone into her bag. They had met online a few weeks earlier. Nothing unusual about that. Almost everyone she knew had at least one story like this. A date from an app. A conversation that started with jokes and moved, slowly, into something more familiar. Late-night messages. Long pauses before replies. Small details shed out of trust, not urgency. He had seemed normal. That was the word she used when she talked about him to a friend. Normal. A steady job. Divorced. Lived alone. No red flags. No strange requests. He didn't push. Didn't rush. When he suggested meeting in person, he let her choose the place. She chose the coffee shop. It felt safer that way. Public. Daytime. Close to home. She told herself it was just coffee. Not a commitment. Not a promise. Just two people sitting across from each other, deciding if the voice on the other end of the phone matched the person in front of them. Inside, the shop smelled like espresso and warm pastries. A few people were already there. A woman with a laptop near the window. An older man reading a newspaper at the counter. Two empty tables near the back. She ordered a latte, paid, waited. While the barista worked, she glanced at the door. It stayed closed. She told herself that was fine. He'd said he was nearby, not that he was there. When her drink was ready, she carried it to a small table close to the wall. She sat with her back to the room, facing the door at an angle. Another small choice. One she didn't think much about at the time. She sent a quick message. Said she'd just arrived. While she waited, she took a sip of a drink and let her shoulders relax. This was the part she always hated. The waiting. The few minutes when you're alone, but not really alone. When you're aware of every movement around you. Every time the door opens. Every sound that feels louder than it should. She thought about leaving. Not because she was scared. Just because she sometimes did that. Show up. Decide she didn't feel like it. Go home. No harm done. But then her phone buzzed again. He said he was parking. She looked at the door. Nothing yet. The conversation up to that point replayed in her mind. The way he'd asked about her job. The way he remembered small things she mentioned, like her favorite kind of coffee, the street she grew up on. The way he didn't make jokes when she talked about serious things. Just listened. It had made her feel seen. That was the word she used later. Seen. She took another sip. The latte was still too hot. She set it down and wrapped her hands around the cup anyway, letting the warmth settle in. Outside, a car slowed near the cab. She noticed it through the window, but didn't turn her head fully. She didn't want to look eager. She told herself that was silly, but the thought was there anyway. The door opened. Someone stepped in. Not him. The door closed again. She checked the time. A few minutes past noon. She told herself there was no rush. People were late all the time. Traffic. Parking. Second thoughts. She didn't know which one it was. And she didn't ask. Instead, she sat there, in a place she trusted, holding a drink she'd ordered for herself, waiting for someone she believed she knew well enough to meet. The waiting stretched, but it didn't feel heavy yet. Just slightly awkward. The kind of pause that happens before something begins. She scrolled through her phone, not really reading anything. Let a few minutes pass. Looked up each time the door opened. Another message came through. He said he was just circling for parking. Said the street was tighter than it looked. She smiled at that. Typed back that it was fine. No hurry. They talked enough by now that these small delays didn't bother her. Their conversations had settled into something steady, predictable in a comforting way. Good mornings. How was your day? Small complaints about work. Pictures of dinners cooked alone. He had told her about his car once. An older sedan. Nothing flashy. He joked that it blended in anywhere, which made it impossible to find in a crowded lot. She remembered that now and found herself glancing toward the window again, scanning the street without really meaning to. She thought about the first night they talked for hours. How easy it had been. No pressure. No performance. Just two people filling the quiet with words. She remembered feeling surprised by how much she shared. Things she usually kept for later, or never said at all. He had listened. That mattered to her. The coffee shop filled in slowly around her. Another customer came in. Then another. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Cups clinked. Normal sounds. Ordinary life moving along. She checked her phone again. No new message. She took a longer sip of her drink. It had cooled enough now. She noticed how her hands had stopped shaking. She hadn't realized they were before. There was comfort in being there, in knowing people could see her, in knowing she wasn't alone, even if she was waiting alone. She thought about how she'd described the meeting to a friend the night before. Just coffee, she'd said. Nothing serious. She'd said it casually, but part of her had hoped it might be more than that. Not in a dramatic way. Just in the quiet sense that maybe this was someone she wouldn't have to explain herself to. Another message buzzed. He apologized. Said he'd found a spot, but it was a block away. She told him she was at a small table near the back. She didn't add anything else. Time passed in pieces. A minute here, another there. Long enough to notice. Not long enough to worry. She watched the door again. It opened. Someone stepped in. Someone else stepped out. She felt that small, familiar letdown each time it wasn't him. She wondered what he'd look like in person. She'd seen photos, of course. Smiling. Casual. Always taken from the same angle. But photos didn't always tell the truth. She knew that. Still, she trusted what she'd felt talking to him. The ease. The way he never made her feel foolish for being careful. When she'd suggested the coffee shop, he'd agreed immediately. Said it was a good idea. That had mattered too. Her phone stayed quiet. She glanced at the time again. 10 minutes late now. Still within reason. Still explainable. Outside, another car pulled up to the cab. It paused, idling. She noticed it without really thinking about why. The driver didn't get out. The car just sat there, engine running. She looked back down at her phone. A message came through. He said he was close. Said he could see the shop. She felt a small flicker of relief. A tightening in her chest she hadn't known was there finally loosening. She didn't respond right away. Just set the phone down and waited. The car outside pulled away. She missed it. Inside, the door stayed closed. She waited longer than she planned to. Not out of politeness, but because leaving still felt like a bigger decision than staying. Staying meant nothing had gone wrong yet. It meant this was still just a delay. She picked up her phone again. No new messages. The last one still sat there on the screen. He could see the shop. She looked up toward the windows, then back to the door. From where she sat, the glass only showed part of the street. Reflections. Movement without detail. Cars sliding past like shadows. She told herself he might be standing just outside. Maybe pacing. Maybe on a call. She had done that before. Sitting in her own car, waiting for the moment to feel right before going in. Another minute passed. The woman near the window closed her laptop and left. The older man folded his newspaper, stood, and walked to the counter. The room felt thinner now. Quieter. Fewer people between her and the silence. She noticed that change. Her phone buzzed. He asked if she was inside. She answered immediately. Said yes. Said she was at a small table near the back. She didn't add that she had been there the whole time. She focused on keeping her breathing slow. Normal. Nothing bad had happened. Nothing had crossed any line yet. This was still explainable. But something had shifted. She became aware of details she hadn't noticed before. The faint hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. The way the barista glanced in her direction, then looked away. The thin ring of foam drying along the edge of her cup. She slid her chair a few inches so she could see the door more clearly. A quiet adjustment. One no one else noticed. One she would think about later. She checked her phone again. No reply. She considered standing up, walking outside. Just looking. Just confirming where he was. That would settle it. Instead, she stayed seated, hands wrapped around the cup even though it had gone lukewarm. Outside, a car rolled past slowly. Then another. The street looked ordinary, uninterested. Nothing about it suggested anything was wrong. Her phone buzzed again. He said he was right outside now. Relief flickered through her before she could stop it. Small, but real. Enough to make her sit up straighter. She looked at the door. It didn't open. She waited for the sound. The chime. Footsteps. A voice. Anything to mark his arrival. Nothing came. She typed a short message back, asking where he was standing. The pause that followed felt longer. Long enough for her to notice that she was the only person sitting alone now. Long enough for the quiet to feel pointed. Finally, her phone buzzed. He said he was in his car. That gave her pause. Not fear, just confusion. If he was there, why hadn't he come in? She asked if he needed help finding parking. The message showed as delivered. No response followed. She leaned back in her chair and let out a small, silent breath, almost a laugh. People got nervous. People hesitated. Maybe this was just awkwardness finding its way out. The idea that he might not come in at all landed heavier than she expected. She told herself she could leave whenever she wanted. That she wasn't waiting for permission. That she was choosing to stay. Outside, a car pulled up near the curb. It slowed, then stopped. From her seat, she could see part of it through the window. Just enough to register its presence. An ordinary car. An ordinary color. She watched it without realizing she had stopped breathing. The engine stayed running. Her phone buzzed again. One more message. He said he would be right there. She looked up from the screen. The car at the curb pulled away. The door didn't open. She stayed seated, eyes fixed on the empty space outside the window, trying to understand why her chest felt tight and why the room suddenly felt much too quiet. She checked the time again. More than 20 minutes had passed since she sat down. Long enough that staying no longer felt neutral. Long enough that it felt like she was choosing something, even if she didn't know what. Her phone buzzed once more. He said he didn't want to leave his car unattended. Said he'd pulled over just briefly. Asked if she could step outside for a second. She read the message twice. It wasn't a strange request on its own. People did that all the time. Met at doors. Waved each other down. It made sense, in a practical way. Parking on that street really was tight. Still, she didn't answer right away. She looked around the coffee shop. The barista was busy at the register. No one was paying attention to her now. The place felt different than it had earlier. Less like a shelter. More like a stop she'd overstayed. She told herself she was overthinking it. That she'd already done the careful part by choosing a public place. By meeting during the day. By telling a friend where she was going. She stood up and slid her chair back under the table. Picked up her bag. Left the half-finished drink behind. Before walking toward the door, she hesitated. Just for a moment. The kind of pause that doesn't have a clear reason attached to it. A quiet instinct she didn't yet have a name for. Then she pushed the door open and stepped outside. The air felt cooler than she expected. The street looked the same as it always did. Cars passing. People walking by without looking at each other. Nothing about it felt dangerous. She glanced up and down the block. A car idled near the curb a short distance away. The same one she'd noticed earlier. She thought. She couldn't be sure. Cars blurred together after a while. Her phone buzzed again. He said he could see her now. She felt exposed standing there alone on the sidewalk. More visible than she had been inside. She shifted her bag on her shoulder and walked a few steps closer to the cab. The car's window lowered slightly. She didn't see his face clearly at first. Just an outline. Movement. A hand lifting in a small wave. She waved back. He apologized for the confusion. Said he hadn't expected parking to be this difficult. His voice sounded like it had over the phone. Calm. Familiar enough. He suggested pulling forward a bit so she could step closer without blocking the sidewalk. She took another step toward the street. Cars moved around them, impatient, unaware. Someone honked farther down the block. Life kept going. She leaned slightly toward the open window so she could hear him better. He asked if she wanted to just sit in the car for a minute while he found a better spot. Said they could still walk back together. Said it would only take a second. She thought about the coffee shop behind her, the open door, the table she'd left. She thought about how awkward it would be to say no now, how strange it might seem, how she didn't want to look rude or paranoid. She told herself it was still public, still daylight, still right there on the street. She said okay. The passenger door unlocked with a soft click. She opened it and slid into the seat, setting her bag at her feet. The interior smelled faintly of air freshener and something older beneath it. The door closed beside her with a solid sound. He thanked her for being patient. Put the car in gear. They pulled away from the curb slowly. She glanced back toward the coffee shop as it passed out of view. The windows reflected the street now, offering nothing back. She told herself this was temporary. Just a quick loop around the block. A practical solution to a small problem. The car turned a corner she didn't expect. Then another. She asked where he was going. He said he knew a spot up ahead. She nodded, even though she didn't see any open spaces. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She felt it but didn't reach for it. She didn't want to seem distracted or nervous. The street grew quieter as they drove farther from the shop. Fewer pedestrians. Fewer places to stop. She shifted in her seat and looked out the window. The buildings were unfamiliar now. Still ordinary, just not hers. She told herself she could ask him to stop at any time. She didn't. The car continued forward, steady and unhurried, carrying her father from the place she had chosen because it felt safe. The car kept moving. Not fast, not erratic, just steady enough that each passing block felt intentional. She watched the streets slide by, trying to recognize something familiar. A store, a sign, anything that told her where she was. Her phone buzzed again inside her bag. This time she reached for it. No signal. She told herself it was just a dead zone. That happened sometimes. She tucked the phone back down and looked ahead through the windshield. The road stretched forward, empty and calm. She asked him how far the parking spot was. He said not far. His tone hadn't changed. That was the strange part. Still calm. Still ordinary. Like this was exactly what he'd planned all along. They passed a stretch of closed storefronts. Then a long block with no sidewalks. The houses were set back from the road here. Fewer lights. Fewer places to stop. She shifted in her seat. The seatbelt pressed against her chest. She became aware of how quiet the car was. No radio. Just the sound of the engine and the tires against the pavement. She thought about the coffee shop. About the drink cooling on the table. About how many times the door must have opened after she left. How no one inside would have known she'd stepped out with someone she trusted. She asked him to slow down. He did. Just slightly. Enough to acknowledge the request without answering it. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a missed call notification. Delayed. From a friend. One she'd told about the coffee date. She didn't say anything about it. She asked where they were going again. He told her to relax. Said they were almost there. The road narrowed. Trees lined both sides now, their branches leaning inward. The houses disappeared altogether. She felt the moment shift. Not sharply, not dramatically, just enough that she knew something had gone wrong. She asked him to stop the car. He didn't. The silence inside the vehicle thickened. The calm he'd maintained no longer felt reassuring. It felt deliberate. She reached for the door handle. It didn't open. She didn't scream. Not yet. She tried to keep her voice steady, tried to reason, tried to understand how a normal decision had carried her this far from where she meant to be. The car turned off the main road. After that, there were no landmarks she could recognize. No signs. No way to mark the time passing. Later, no one would be able to say exactly when she disappeared. There would be guesses, estimates, a window of time that stretched wider with every unanswered question. Her phone would stop updating altogether. At the coffee shop, her drink would be cleared away, the table wiped clean. Another customer would sit there later that afternoon, unaware of who had waited there before them. Outside, traffic would continue as usual. Cars pulling up, cars pulling away, none of them carrying her back. The messages she'd sent earlier would be reread by people trying to find meaning in them. Each word examined, each pause questioned. They would watch the footage from inside the shop, see her arrive, see her sit, see her stand up and walk out of frame. They would rewind it again and again. They would look for the moment something changed, for a sign, for hesitation, for anything that explained why she never came back inside. But the camera wouldn't show what happened after she stepped through the door. It wouldn't capture the sound of the lock clicking, or the road turning quiet, or the way trust, once given, can carry someone out of sight. All that would remain is the empty chair, the timestamp, the car pulling away without her ever returning to the place she believed would keep her safe. And then, nothing. Just silence where she should have been.